I know it's the end of the day, but I'm going to start off with a question. Why do we have lawns? So it's not so dusty. That's a good one. I have people shaking their heads. I have, I don't know. And I will give you guys one good piece of advice. Do not go home and ask your significant other this after she's had a very long day at work and she's very tired, because you're going to get an eye roll and perhaps go mow the lawn, right? I asked my friends, I asked my family, I asked my colleagues this, and I got many of the same responses. I don't know. Because my dad had a lawn. Because it's American. I got that response, and it's actually not too far off from the truth. My favorite response, though, is from one of my colleagues who said, I grew up pretty poor. My family was happy, but we were really poor. And we grew up in, a underdeveloped area. And growing up, especially during the summer, my front yard was brown. It had dirt, it had weeds, and we didn't have very much grass. And I told myself then that when I grew up and when I made it, when I succeeded in the American dream, I would have that front lawn. I would have an irrigated lawn, and when I had that, I knew that I had made it. And that really, truly is part of the American dream now. Famously, Herbert Hoover, during a campaign speech, promised all Americans a chicken in every pot, a car in every garage. And that became our manifest destiny of the 20th century. This is really what we expect as an American. We expect a home ownership. We expect to be able to send our kids to school. We expect to have a manicured yard. So going back to this picture, this is Americana, or at least suburban Americana. Anybody know where this picture was taken? I wouldn't expect you to, because this picture could be an aerial photograph of any neighborhood in the United States of America. I could tell you this was Sylvania. I could tell you this was the suburbs of Washington, D.C. I could tell you this was the suburbs of Phoenix. Green grass, desert, that seems like a bad idea, right? This is actually the suburbs of Chicago, but it makes no difference. We as Americans like to have things the same no matter where we go. We like to have a cohesive whole as Americans. We like to be able to go to a McDonald's in LA and get that same meal when we go to a McDonald's in Toledo, right? So this is just a continuation of that American desire, that American psyche that we have. Now, I'm actually a botanist. That's what I was classically trained at, so I would be remiss if I didn't throw up a botanical print of this plant that we are so obsessed with. So look out the back of you, look over to the sides. This is the plant we're obsessed with, or at least one of them. So this is Poa pratensis. Most of you are probably more familiar with it with the cultivar name of the particular one we plant, Kentucky Bluegrass. So this is Kentucky Bluegrass. This is what it looks like in its natural state. Of course, we have our kids or our husbands or our significant others go out and mow the lawn on a regular basis so that it doesn't look this wild and crazy. This plant, or on this plant, Americans spend $30 billion a year raising, cultivating. $30 billion a year. We can't eat it. I mean, I guess you could eat it. It's not, poisonous. It's not very good. So we don't eat it. We don't make anything from it. It is literally so that we can keep up with the Joneses and so that it can look good. So where did this all come from? Why do we have lawns? If you go around the world, most places don't have these huge expanses of lawns in their front yard. It is really, truly a North American and especially United States thing. Well, I know one of the ways that I could get people to cut down on their lawns is to tell them, well, it's actually kind of a British thing. Because it is. These huge front lawns actually became very popular during the Tudor era of Great Britain, where the aristocracy accented their castles or their estates with huge sprawling lawns. It was a place for them to have picnics, to have lawn games. And I know I'm kind of making fun of them with these hand motions, but I'm trying to prove a point here. And fundamentally, aside from the great estates that they had, fundamentally, it was a huge sign saying, look how rich I am. Because back then, food was still pretty scarce. People couldn't afford to waste land on this green plant that you can't eat and you can't make clothes out of. So this was a sign saying, look how rich we are. We can just waste our land on grass. And that quickly came over to the United States. Mount Vernon. This is an illustration of Mount Vernon, so Washington's estate. Remember, our founding fathers were not normal U.S. citizens, right? Most of them were aristocracy in Great Britain prior to the Revolution. Washington, of course, was a high-ranking officer in the British Army. What do we see leading up to his estate? Great, vast expanses of lawns. So as Americans, or as with the same kind of thing that Americans did with starting our new government, telling the king to go get bent, we said we're going to democratize the lawn. Every American can have a lawn. We have all this land. This is something that we could do. And that was pretty popular, but we were still a young country. It wasn't until post-World War II when the lawn took over, when the American obsession took over. So two things were happening. Americans were moving out into the suburbs. They were moving from the cities where it's pretty difficult to have a lawn in the city. They were moving out into the suburbs. John Mellencamp sang the song Little Pink Houses. So everybody was getting their little pink house. And the Eisenhower administration was building the interstate system. So, of course, everybody with their little pink house wanted to have that perfect lawn, and you had to keep up with the Joneses. Well, that's something that makes us comfortable. That's something that the American public likes. So what are we going to put along the interstates? We're going to put lawns. We're going to put turf grass. And if we do that across the entire United States, that's another cohesive thing that's keeping us all together as a country, as this great country. So municipalities, state governments, even the federal government in some regards, spends billions of dollars every single year maintaining this. And I said it's part of our psyche. We feel a little more comfortable, and you could actually take it back to our ancestral roots in the Fertile Crescent of Africa. It's a lot safer to be in a short grass area where no lion is hiding or no cougars are hiding or snakes. It actually does make you feel safer to be in an area where you can see your surroundings versus a covered up area. Now, last time I checked, I work at the Toledo Zoo, so I have a higher chance of running into a cougar than most of you do. But last time I checked, walking around the city of Toledo, we don't have that issue. So I think now we can move a little bit past our instinct that we don't like being around tall grasses and maybe come up with some better ideas. So what's the problem with lawn? I'm kind of bashing lawn indirectly, and I haven't gotten to it yet. What are the problems with lawns? Well, first of all, we have this ecological principle called niche partitioning. Every organism has its own niche. It's biotic and abiotic elements that it interacts with. So each organism, including plants, absorbs certain nutrients from their environment, but they're not able to use other nutrients. We don't really eat grass, so grass wouldn't be our niche. But to an herbivore, they eat grass. That's part of their niche. In a normal, healthy ecosystem, all of the niches within an area are filled. You have lots of biodiversity, lots of different organisms all occupying all of the space within an ecosystem. When you try to grow a monoculture, mono meaning one, of course, culture, so one species, rows of corn. I keep pointing to the Toledo Museum of Art's lawn. I don't want to pick on them, but a lawn. You're fundamentally going against basic ecology. You're saying, I want this one plant to grow here that only occupies a very small niche, and I don't want anything else to grow around it. Well, of course, when you try to do that, you get all sorts of organisms moving in that are trying to occupy the niche. You get dandelions, you get clover, you get insects that are eating your nice, pretty turf grass. you get fungus that moves in. And how do we respond to that? We spray herbicides. We spray pesticides. We spray fertilizers so that that lawn can hopefully get strong enough to resist this. Of course, that's never going to happen because it's just basic biology. It's not going to be able to take up that many nutrients. So fundamentally, it's a losing game. We're fighting with nature when we're trying to grow monocultures. And on top of that, turf grass is not very good at being a plant. And I'll put it that way. So this graph, this shows our native plant species, all to the right of the screen, and turf grass to the very, very far left. It's probably very hard to see in the back. And it shows above ground biomass and below ground biomass. Our native species here in Ohio or in the Midwest will typically have roots that go 10, 15, even 20 feet down below the surface. Your turf grass that you have in your lawn goes about 2 to 3 inches. So that's why in the middle of summer, when it stops raining here in Northwest Ohio, your lawns go brown, right? However, these prairie plants are adapted to that. They're used to that. They will actually stay green for a pretty long period of time. And if they do start going brown, those roots 15 feet below the surface, those are still alive. Those are just fine. So grass is really not, or turf grass is really not a very good plant to begin with. And also, you run into this issue. If you have roots that are 15 foot deep, that's going to be able to take up a lot of water. As a matter of fact, if you look at your soil below a planted area, below the turf grass, it's basically like a solid brick. As a matter of fact, when people are installing new lawns, they compress the soil. Well, when you compress the soil, it actually inhibits water from seeping into the soil. So much so, and then you have the very shallow root system, a section of turf grass can take up about 1/4 of an inch of rainwater per hour. A well-grown prairie can take up about 7.5 inches of rainwater per hour. And that's because all of these roots that are all intertwined are breaking up the soil, so the prairie soil actually closely resembles a sponge, whereas the turf grass soil closely resembles a brick. Now, we talked about all of the chemicals that we're spraying on the turf grass, or the turf grass along the median that's supposed to be absorbing all the runoff from the roads. So now you have 1/4 of an inch of hour per runoff, and all of those extra chemicals you sprayed on your lawn, those wash off, or you have 7.5 inches where all of those chemicals get sequestered into the soil and into the roots. And it really is, turf grass is an American obsession. So this map was done by NASA. Everything in green is large areas of turf grass in the United States. And they figured out how much area of irrigated turf grass is in the U.S. Turns out it's 178,000 square kilometers of turf grass in the United States. That makes turf grass the most irrigated crop ahead of corn and soybean. And my favorite part is, look where some of these green dots are. It's a little concerning that Arizona has any green dots at all. South California has lots of green dots. We grow turf grass in areas that it should never grow in. And remember, I was talking about how compressed the soil is, how we're spraying herbicides and pesticides, and our typical lawn is a biodiversity desert. So look at every single one of these green dots and think a biodiversity desert. And I want to apologize to deserts here, especially if anybody studies deserts, because actual deserts have higher biodiversity than your lawn. I've done the studies on the lawns. I do trapping on the lawns. You're lucky if you get 4 or 5 species occupying a typical lawn. It would be an extremely degraded desert if you had that many species or that few of species. So what is happening with this amount of lawn? Well, we're already seeing the consequences, the ecosystem level consequences of having lawns, of becoming obsessed with growing monocultures. I'm sure you've all seen in the news, and no, I'm not talking about my news articles that they so kindly introduced me by, all about the pollinator crisis. Bee-pocalypse is one of my favorite ones. I just love when you add pocalypse to anything. Water-pocalypse, right? So not only are European honeybees, one of our chief pollinators, declining, but all of our native bees are declining. Our native pollinators are declining. Our butterflies. The monarch butterfly, one of our favorite organisms, truly in the United States, has declined more than 90% in the last 20 years. Well, why do you think this is happening? Well, increased agriculture, of course, but actually agricultural land, so land under growing conditions, has decreased in the last 20 years. But also increased suburbanization and more lawns in the United States. You take away habitat, how are you going to have more bees? How are you going to have more pollinators if they have no food? And of course, that last speaker was perfect. It was a perfect intro to me. And of course, the water crisis. I really don't have to say too much about that, but once again, the agricultural system got chiefly blamed for this, and I'm certainly not going to let them off the hook and say that runoff from corn and soybean fields don't contribute to nutrient loads in Lake Erie. But very little was talked about with our front lawns and our city lawns and how much fertilizer gets put on there, how much fertilizer runs off of each one of those lawns and winds up directly in Lake Erie. So what can we do? It's part of America. We have turf grass. What are we supposed to put there in its place? Well, here's a novel idea. Let's just put what would normally grow there in the first place. And in the case of the Midwest, this is what would normally occur here in the first place. And Toledoans have no excuse because we have a fantastic park system. If you drive, 20 miles to the west here, you can go into the Oak Openings area, one of the global biodiversity hotspots in the world. And you can see something that looks just like this. And that's what Northwest Ohio would have been prior to human settlement. We would have had the Great Black Swamp also, and I'm not going to be a proponent of bringing that back, but I think we can do this, or I thought we could do this. So when you plant something like this, and I want you to note that those are actually people's houses right behind there. I'm saying plant these in any urban area where you have an abandoned vacant lot. Plant these on any roadside where you have grass. You're going to bring back ecosystem services, and simultaneously, you're going to meet presidential directives to conserve pollinators and conserve monarch butterflies. But that's going to cost too much, right? Well, no, it turns out it's actually incredibly cheap to do this. So this data, I know you're not supposed to put words and numbers on TED Talks, but I got to throw this one up here. So this is from the Northeastern Illinois Planning Commission. Chicago was actually one of the first cities that started planting prairies instead of grasses. What they found was that it's about half as expensive to plant a prairie the first year as it is to plant turf grass. And then yearly maintenance, you save even more money. And this is in Chicago dollars. Put this in Toledo dollars and it's even less. It actually costs me about $800 to sow an acre of prairie plants. So prairies don't need to be mowed on a biweekly basis. They certainly don't need to be irrigated, so that's saving a lot of water. This isn't taking into account the ecosystem services that it's providing, so water filtration, natural water filtration. This is simply cost of seed, cost of maintenance. And it's something that has happened here in the United States before. This seems like a far-flung thought. This seems like, well, I don't think we could actually do this, right? That's a really nice thought, but I don't think we could actually do this. And I'm here today proposing that not only can we do this, but this is a great way to revive Rust Belt cities. Rust Belt cities in the late 20th and early 21st centuries have truly lost their way. As manufacturing jobs moved overseas, we lost our identities in the Rust Belt. Well, this is a great way to come up with a new identity. Can you imagine? Visit Ohio and visit the prairies in the summer. Sounds crazy, but it's actually already been done. The picture on the left is 1800s New England, and the picture on the right is that same location today. So as Manifest Destiny took hold, the real one this time, and Americans moved out west, we started conducting agriculture in the Midwestern states. Well, it turned out agriculture was far easier and had better yields in the Midwest. Well, I wonder why it had better yields. Oh, that's right. Those were prairies at one time, much richer soil. So as that happened, it no longer was cost efficient to farm in New England. So I'm not saying that this was some genius in New England came up with, let's plant trees and bring it back to how it used to be. It just happened by mistake, right? These farmlands were allowed to go fallow. They eventually returned to eastern deciduous woods. And now today, I'm sure some of you have probably visited the Northeast during the fall. It's a huge moneymaker for New England to go see the fall colors. And that's why I say that's something that Rust Belt cities could do. Come to the Rust Belt cities. Maybe we'll change that name a little bit. Come to the Midwest and see the prairie flowers in the middle of the summer. Let's rejuvenate the area. And we already have a guidebook, basically, that the Northeast has done for us. But wait, there's more. I feel like I'm one of these, late night TV salesmen, because it gets even better. So we know that we're increasing biodiversity. We're meeting presidential objectives to increase pollinators and save monarch butterflies. We are saving municipalities a ton of money. A single acre in Toledo costs the municipality something like $3,000 to maintain per year. Imagine all of the acres of roads that we have. But even better, it actually makes us feel better. So there are lots of studies that regardless of the underlying psychological condition, people feel better when they're exposed to nature. Some of the top cities that are ranked by the happiness index, some of the top cities have large amounts of natural areas. And then when you start thinking about schools, guaranteed it's an election cycle, people are going to be talking about schools. Turns out when kids learn science in an outdoor classroom, in a natural setting, their test scores are as much as 27% higher than their peers who sat in a lecture and listened to a guy like me drone on. Which situation do you think these kids learn better at? Did they learn about turtles in the classroom, or did they learn about going out with my boss there from Wild Toledo and actually picking up a turtle? I guarantee you they remember this event. So imagine if the city, every single school had a prairie. Instead of having grass in their front yard, they had a prairie that the kids could go out and they could learn botany. They could learn about plants. They could learn about insects. They could learn about pollination. And they could learn about vertebrates. And they could learn ecology. So now we're saving the city money. We're saving pollinators. We're saving butterflies. And we're potentially increasing our STEM scores all at once. And it's actually cheaper than what we're doing already. Seems like a no-brainer. So I'm going to end with it. It's a question that each one of us has to answer. Do we continue the status quo and hope against all hope that it's going to change? Do we keep doing the same thing, hoping that it will change? Or do we go against the pack? Do we make our own decisions? Do we tell our politicians what we want and trailblaze something that very few have been able to do, and that's leaving this next generation with an earth that's in better condition than we inherited. Thank you.